As the Roaring Twenties began, American culture transitioned into a dynamic social and artistic movement. Many artists established their renowned reputations during this time, and many people responded in both positive and negative ways. These responses instigated social advancements. The radical movements of the time were exhibited within jazz music, which expanded into various other genres of artistic expression. The development of jazz and black music from the 1920s to 1960s led to the rise of radical African American movements and progression of new genres of artistic expressions, which greatly influences American culture today.
George Gershwin, star of an age of great songwriters, refines the jungle rhythms of jazz for the unrefined, and band leader Paul Whiteman interprets them for those hell-bent on going places and doing things. Restraint, manners, morals, bushwalk, nerds, banana oil. The shell shock of war and the cynicism that followed changes all that. This is a new day. All God.
Jazz was not always supported despite its success later in the century. Middle-class folks and educated blacks looked down upon jazz, referring to it as the devil's music. Campaigns to censor the devil's music grew with the popularity of jazz. Thomas Edison even ridiculed jazz music by saying it would sound better being played backwards. Musical educators at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance responded with skepticism, fearing young people would lose interest in classical music. In addition to these negative responses, U.S. Navy members attended jazz clubs, and many of the attended clubs were shut down because some people feared of the health of the naval officers because they attended the clubs. Naval officer health was not the only thing feared for. A Cincinnati home filled with pregnant mothers prevented jazz theaters from being built around the house, claiming that jazz music would be dangerous to fetuses' development. Regardless of these negative responses, writers such as Langston Hughes responded with enthusiasm to jazz. During the Harlem Renaissance, when he stated his poems, many were executed over jazz backdrop. His poems truly complemented the jazz of this time. Langston Hughes even recorded with the bassist Charles Mingus. The prohibition at the time of the Harlem Renaissance introduced jazz to another complication. The prohibition led to gangster-run nightclubs where there was the forbidden alcohol. Whites and blacks came together socially for the first time in Chicago clubs. Despite the hardships jazz went through at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, jazz overcame the negative response. The positive responses were taken advantage of, which were what aroused so much positive effect.
During the era of the 1920s and the 1960s, there were many popular artists that made their impact on the music world, which include Charles Mingus, Louis Armstrong, Nat King Cole, and many more musicians. Following the evolution of jazz music and the blues, the emancipation of slaves was making a difference in history. Due to its low-class reputation, ragtime and the blues were played at dances and shows. Lastly, rock and roll evolved in the United States between the 1940s and the 1950s. Rock and roll made a difference in the music industry, but it also made a societal impact. This type of music was commonly used in movies, television, and made a difference in fashion, lifestyles, and basic language. Over time, people referred to this genre as rock music. Louis Armstrong was known for his unique trumpet style and his wonderful voice. Armstrong was constantly given a hard time for the color of his skin and the way he talked. He was also forbidden to sing from many band leaders because some believed that his voice would be too coarse for some audiences. Along with Armstrong, Nat King Cole is still known today as one of the most influential musicians of all time.
Unforgettable.
As an artist, Nat King Cole surprisingly changed his well-known music from jazz to pop music over time. He had encountered racism firsthand, especially while touring in the South. By the 1950s, Nat King Cole emerged as a popular solo performer, making a difference in music history.
one thing more.
Jazz music evolved into a prominent part of American popular culture in the 1920s, which later led to new types of poetry, art, and music. It increased the status of African Americans because of its popularity, making their culture the desire of the majority. These songs were used to share the culture's history, synchronizing group efforts in order to tell emotional stories. The music of these artists comforted and healed, especially during a time of discrimination and segregation. It motivated a generation, supported them in the struggle, helped soothe their pain, and challenged the status quo.
In May of 1963, protest against segregation in Alabama brought the issue of racial conflict to a head.
Fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south, where legal remedies are not at hand.
The jazz music of the 1920s transitioned into the 60s as powerful music in the form of gospels and spirituals, which revitalized a sense of black pride. These freedom songs were sung at marches, sit-ins, en route to jails, or performed by civil rights activists. When blacks were demanding justice and equal treatment, music reinforced the courage and determination. The lyrics and emotional delivery touched people of all races and gave a sense of unity. Music became an avenue for African Americans to express their opinions, display critiques and contentions, and share their ideas and values. As jazz transitioned to various other genres such as ragtime, gospel, and funk, it had great influence on American culture and has led to the music we listen to today. Even though African American music has evolved through various eras and styles, the powerful lyrics and rhythms remain prominent and influential during the course of our history.